Well, I feel the lifeline growing colder, and I feel myself slip away. Now you set me free this way, gotten over the town, okay. All this is 8,000 days.
All right, welcome back, Toker Talk. Sorry for the abrupt stop there, but welcome back to Toker Talk Radio. Looks like we got the video ready to go here, so let me set a couple of graphics. We'll just let this play. This is from the Portland City Club earlier today.
Of Astoria. Since 1994, he is former president of the Oregon District Attorneys Association, has served on the board of directors of the National District Attorney Association since 1997, and on the ABA's Criminal Justice Section Leadership Council since 2009. Josh is a frequent guest on national radio and television programs discussing the criminal justice system and the nature of the relationship between popular culture, the media, and the law. Paul Stanford is an entrepreneur with expertise in hemp and cannabis. He has arranged financing and bank letters of credit for import-export of cargo container shipments of hemp products to and from Asia, Europe, and North America. Also, he has been an expert court witness on marijuana and medicinal cannabis. Paul is the author of many articles published in both magazines and books. And now, if I could invite the debaters, please, up here to their podiums. Mr. Marquis, your opening statement.
I'm having a little hard time hearing.
Sorry, your opening statement, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the City Club. My name is Josh Marquis. I'm the District Attorney in Clatson County, Oregon. And I'm here speaking both on my own behalf and that of the Oregon District Attorneys Association, 36 independently elected DAs from across Oregon, who frankly rarely can agree on any one issue, but we do agree on this one. And although this is somewhat awkward because I'm not the proponent, Paul and I have debated a couple other times, and since I have now 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I'd like to address the main issues. This is essentially a solution in search of a problem. We do not live in Georgia or Texas. Let's talk about very practically what happens in Oregon if you're caught with marijuana.
All right, I want to pause that for just a second because in the opening statement, Josh Marquis here sets a frame for the entire debate. A solution in search of a problem, as if marijuana prohibition in the state of Oregon right now is not really a problem. Now listen to Marquis' defense of that.
Almost 40 years ago, a DA in Eugene, Oregon, named Pat Horton, sponsored decriminalization of less than an ounce of marijuana. So for 40 years in Oregon, a person caught with what used to be called a lid, and anybody probably under the age of 40 doesn't know what I'm talking about, but a lid used to be an ounce, and it sold for about $10 to $15 when I was at the University of Oregon in the 1970s. It was probably about 2% tetrahydrocannabinol. The marijuana today, Paul could probably tell you much better, but depending on where you buy it, anywhere between $200 and $800 an ounce. And it's much better than dope. The THC content's about 25%. The point.
All right, so here we got another part of the frame that marijuana is much, much worse today than it ever was. Much, much worse. It was only 2% back in the day, and now it's 25% today. Well, first of all, that's complete and utter bunk. Nobody was smoking 2% weed back in the day. 2% weed is pretty damn close to hemp, people. So, and as far as it being 25% today, well, if you're lucky and you know the right people, but the general weed that's going out there today, even the federal government admits in their potency monitoring project that at best, the average potency of marijuana has doubled.
That you do not go to jail, you do not have an arrest record, period. So, but let's assume it's more than that. What happens in Oregon? Well, the only way that you can be prosecuted for a felony would be if you had theoretically more than that. I'm in court every single day in my county, which is a mid-sized county, and I have never, in my recollection, arraigned somebody who was in custody. I asked the Department of Corrections and found out that the 15,000 people in prison, how many of there are on drug possession of drug charges of any kind? The answer was out of 15,000, 34. How many were there on just marijuana charges, possession? The answer was 6. And all of them, by the way, had very extensive other records. The claim is that this will tax an existing industry.
Before we get to the tax points, so only 10 people out of 15,000 in Oregon in prison. We don't really have a problem. There's no real problem. Even with people with felonies, it's not really a problem. Only 10 of them are in jail. If you have less than an ounce, it's not really a problem. The whole frame being set up here is there's no need to panic, no need to do this legalization because there's no problems with prohibition as it exists today. Keep that in mind as you listen to the responses. Now on to the tax thing.
What Mr. Stanford is asking for basically is a grudge match to the U.S. Justice Department. The Obama administration, just in the last couple of days, has raided marijuana plantations both in Southern Oregon and Northern California. They've made it clear they will not tolerate it. So the fact of the matter is that the idea that people who are growing marijuana is a weed, unlike tobacco, OxyContin, all these other drugs, it's very easy to grow. You can grow in your basement, in your attic, anywhere. So why on earth would someone who is making money either as a hobby grower or a full-on entrepreneur all of a sudden say, well, I'll let the government take 20%. And oh, by the way, I'm going to put my name on the list so when the federal government comes after me, they can arrest me and charge me with a felony.
Mr. Stanford, your opening statement, please.
Good afternoon, Civic Club members and civic leaders and guests. Proud to be here this afternoon.
It's the Portland Club.
Regarding Measure 80, which is an historic opportunity for the state of Oregon to bring what I see as sensible thinking to the question of marijuana. First of all, I'd like to put this in a historical context and look at the vote that ended alcohol prohibition. In 1932, Oregon voted on ballot measure 7, which passed with 57%, and they understood that regardless of whether they consumed alcohol or not, or supported the alcohol industry, that prohibition wasn't really getting anywhere, and it was the worst way to deal with this problem. So they changed their minds and regulated marijuana. Now that was 1932.
Alcohol.
Federal
Okay.
alcohol prohibition, the Volstead Act wasn't repealed until 1933. Oregon led the way then, and we can lead the way now. Many of the status quo in Oregon back in 1932 said that we couldn't lead the way to do this. But we did, and the rest of the nation did follow. We go forward to today, and Oregon's wine industry is a nearly $3 billion industry, employing more than 10,000 people. With jobs in agriculture, food processing, marketing, finance, and retail services. Oregon's beer industry, brew pubs and distillers also, that's a $2 billion a year industry, employing thousands and bringing money into our state. What Measure 80 says simply is that marijuana prohibition has failed in Oregon and across the nation. We have an opportunity here to fix a long-standing failure, regulate a market that isn't going anywhere, will remain here whichever way this vote goes. And we can create tax-paying jobs, new tax revenue, and have Oregon create a sensible policy for our state. Measure 80 will regulate marijuana like liquor for adults 21 and older, with sales only through state licensed stores. There will be DUI penalties for people who are driving under the influence. Those do not change. Not only that, but Measure 80 includes rules for against people consuming marijuana in public, just like there are laws in place for consuming alcohol in public. We'll save tens of millions of dollars in public safety costs. It's a sensible policy It means our cities and counties will have more money for their budgets. They will focus on truly dangerous substances. You know, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. The war on marijuana is insanity. Measure 8 is the solution.
All right, so the opponent opens up by setting the frame that Measure 80 is a solution in search of a problem. In response, Measure 80 responds with how Oregon can be a pioneer, how we ended alcohol prohibition, how we can be the first ones to do this, how by doing it we'll create all these jobs and all this revenue. But again, why? What's the problem we're solving? What's the issue? Now, there's an implication there that we don't have a lot of money, that we need jobs. That's just general economic things. But with respect to the marijuana, why? Why legalize it? What problem are we solving? Josh Marquis opens up by saying there's not really a problem. Only 10 people are in prison. Anybody with an ounce or less doesn't even get arrested. So what problem are we solving? That was just left out there with no response, and it was a little frustrating. Okay, let's go on to the debate.
So we will now move to the portion of the program where I will ask questions prepared by the Friday Forum Committee. The debaters, both of you, have not seen these questions in advance. There will be two kinds of questions during this debate. I will direct some questions to one debater. He will have 60 seconds to respond. His opponent will then have 45 seconds to rebut. I will also direct questions to both debaters, each of whom will have 60 seconds to respond. We encourage our debaters to use their time not only to offer their response, but also to rebut their opponent's statement. We will begin with a question to both Mr. Marquis and Mr. Stanford. Mr. Stanford will answer first. In 1973, the Oregon legislature made Oregon the first state to decriminalize marijuana by allowing possession of small amounts without criminal penalties. Mr. Stanford, why isn't decriminalization enough? Mr. Marquis, we got rid of alcohol prohibition in the 1930s. Why treat marijuana differently? Mr. Stanford, your response.
Keeping marijuana as a controlled substance and prohibiting its possession continues to lead to adults being arrested and not recognizing that cannabis is a drug that isn't as bad or delicious as alcohol. So our initiative will regulate it and establish sensible policies controlling its use, keeping it out of the hands of kids. Today, actually, children have easier access to marijuana than adults do. In fact, over 80% of kids in high school say that it's easier for them to get marijuana than it is for them to get alcohol. So I believe we need to regulate this, and that's what Measure 80 will do.
All right, so we need to do this because people still get arrested and still go to jail, except the opponent opened up by saying anybody that has less than an ounce doesn't get arrested, and anybody that is more than an ounce is a felony case. There's only 10 of them in jail, right? So once again, we're still, the person who doesn't know about marijuana, doesn't think a thing about marijuana, thinks it's bad, is predestined to vote against it, has not yet been given a problem that they are needing to solve. When it comes to trying to convince people to vote for things, what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince them that they alone have the solution to the problem. We need your vote. There is a terrible injustice you can cure. If you don't act, bad things will happen. And so far, I've not seen any, point being made about how bad prohibition is. It keeps coming back to how great the solution will be. Oh, well, we'll legalize marijuana. We'll get all these jobs. We'll make all this money. It's not how great legalization is. It's how bad prohibition is. If you don't establish that prohibition is harming people right now and it must stop, the inertia of its existence will just prevent people from voting against it. They don't see that there's a problem that they need to solve. At this point in the debate, you can say something like, you know, you're right. People below 1 ounce, people in the state of Oregon get a ticket that costs them money. Then they also get their driver's license suspended for 6 months. And when their driver's license is suspended for 6 months, some people lose their jobs. And when they lose their jobs, sometimes they can't pay their bills or their taxes, and it hurts us all. Or some people living in certain types of housing lose their housing when they get that marijuana charge. There's people that are on probation or parole trying to turn their lives around, but if they're caught with even a single gram, they're sent back to prison. We have to establish that even though marijuana is decriminalized in the state of Oregon, it's not enough. It does not go far enough. And furthermore, we can make a big point of the fact that Oregon's the only state that goes from ticket to felony. 28 grams is a ticket, 29 grams is a felony. Now, Josh Marquis may say that there's not a lot of people being busted for that felony or whatever, but I'll tell you what, when your name gets read up in the paper saying that you've got these felony drug charges against you, it ruins your life. It will have a devastating effect on the rest of your life. That's the points that need to be made there.
Well, for one thing, you can't be arrested for possessing less than an ounce of marijuana. A police officer cannot arrest you. It's not a crime. It's like a speeding ticket. They can write you a citation, they cannot detain you. So that's simply not true. Not only do we have the 1973, we also have in 1998, Oregonians who were compassionate passed the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. And we're told between 500 and 1,000 people would benefit from it. I have no doubt that, and Paul said that marijuana is a drug. It's a drug that, as he calls it, is relatively non-addictive. So let's take it. And that's the difference, to answer your question about what's the difference between that and the Volstead Act. You know, talking about what happened.
First of all, I want to attack Josh Marquis on this one point that he makes, and it should never be allowed to stand. When these people that claim that there's abuse of the medical marijuana program say, well, we were told it would only be for 500 really sick people. Bullshit. In the voter's guide in 1998, when they were voting on the measure to pass medical marijuana, Stormy Ray was in the ballot measure with her argument saying this could help thousands, plural, of people.
It's actually 97, but yeah.
97. No, he voted on it in 98.
You got it passed in 98. I mean, that's when it became enacted in January.
Whatever.
Anyway.
When medical marijuana was passed, it was in the voter's guide, and it said thousands of people could benefit from this.
80 years ago, with what was a failed attempt to just flat out, all of a sudden say all alcohol is illegal. It was a disaster across the board. Everybody violated the law, and it encouraged organized crime. What we're talking about with this proposal is already marijuana is available for less than an ounce. It's available for Oregon medical marijuana, and so that there simply is no problem that needs to be solved.
Once again, no problem to be solved.
Now I will direct a question to one debater who will get 60 seconds. The second debater will have 45 seconds to rebut. My question is to you, Mr. Marquis. The federal government classifies every drug sold in the U.S. from Schedule 1, the highest, to Schedule 5, the lowest, based on a drug's medical risk or how addictive it is. Marijuana has a federal Schedule 1 substance classification. While 17 states and the District of Columbia have legalized medical marijuana, the federal government retains the power to prosecute those who use Schedule 1 drugs. If Oregon voters pass Measure 80, how do you see this conflict playing out here?
There's no doubt in my mind, and I wrote it up 8 years ago in the Oregonian, that marijuana ought to be reclassified as a Schedule 2 drug. Schedule 1 drugs, very briefly, are drugs with no medical use, no doctor can prescribe them. Schedule 2 are things like OxyContin, cocaine, things that can be prescribed.
And let's point that out, that Schedule 2 drugs, if you move marijuana down to Schedule 2, it's like cocaine or methamphetamine, which I understand they put a lot of people in jail for, and that they arrest a lot of people for and break down the doors of their homes for. So there's always that.
Marijuana should be one of those. But to answer your question directly, what will happen, there's something called the Federal Supremacy Clause. And if let's just say in Europe and England, heroin is used as a legitimate hospice drug, and it has real value. If Oregon decided, let's say, as part of our palliative care, that we were going to make heroin available under those circumstances, we would be in direct conflict. The federal DEA would win, and the Obama administration says nothing of what an Obama administration would say, has said, we are not going to permit this, and they've made it clear by the arrests that they're making that this is a violation of federal law, and states can pass all the laws they want. They won't go along with it.
I'm sure glad in 1998 the people in Oregon didn't worry about whether or not the federal government would come in and have a supremacy clause over our Medical Marijuana Act. I'm really glad that Oregonians didn't back down when we passed our Death with Dignity Act, and that the federal government didn't like and tried to enjoin. That's the stupidest argument, Josh. That oh my God, well, we can't do anything because the feds won't like it. The feds will come in and they'll bust us. Oh, well, gee, the feds are coming in and busting us now, my man. God.
Stanford, your rebuttal response?
The fact that marijuana is stronger, according to Mr. Marquis in the studies, means that a lot of people use significantly less of it. When it comes to the federal supremacy issue, we designed this bill to be upheld in federal court by establishing findings by the sovereign, we the people. And so we anticipated a federal court challenge. We designed this law to be upheld in federal court. So there are studies at the University of Michigan since the 70s, a study called Monitoring the Future, where they survey high school students. They've shown there's been a long-term decline since the 1980s in the use of alcohol and tobacco. In fact, just this past couple of years, the use of marijuana has exceeded that of tobacco.
My next question to Mr. Stanford first. According to a 2011 study funded by the National Institutes of Health, 1 out of every 15 high school students smokes marijuana on a near daily basis, thinking it carries very little risk of harm. If voters approve ballot measure 80, what protections would be put in place to help reduce teenage marijuana use? Mr. Stanford.
Yeah, we established strict regulations, strict penalties for people providing marijuana to minors. It would be a felony to sell marijuana to a minor under Measure 80. It would be a misdemeanor to provide it without charge. It would also keep in place the driving under the influence laws, and it would fund development of new testing through the taxes and the license fees. Fund new studies into making certain the drivers on the road aren't impaired. When alcohol was legalized, there weren't breathalyzer tests, and they're using tests currently in Europe where they can detect marijuana with mouth swabs. So we have strict penalties in place for selling it out of the state as well.
That's a pretty good answer there. Pointing out that, we have thought about this. We're going to have enhanced penalties for distribution, sales to minors, and all of that. We've also got to point out, though, that beyond the regulation that we put forth in legalization, again, legalization's great, but it's not how good legalization is. It's how bad prohibition is. And we have to, Paul's made a good job here a couple times mentioning that kids find it much easier to get to cannabis, to buy marijuana, than it is to buy alcohol because of the ID carding situation. To take that further and to address what's going on with this Measure 80, I would take it into the realm of right now. The reason it's so easy for kids to be able to get marijuana is they can buy it from other kids. You don't see a whole lot of high school beer dealers out there, right? We make a point that by legalizing it, we ruin the economy of the teenage dealer situation. We remove that economy. And if they worry about, the kids can just get someone to buy it for them, well, yeah, you point that out, but that's the situation with alcohol. And when the clerk does it, or the homeless guy does it, or the guy in the parking lot, or the older friend does it, we bust them too. Right? The point is right now, to get marijuana, a teenager only needs the help of another teenager. After Measure 80, the teenager will need the help of a corrupted adult. And that's a lot harder bar for the teenager to clear.
Well, just all we have to do is look at Oregon's in the alcohol business, for better or for worse, and look what a great job we've done in keeping alcohol out of the hands of kids. We have an epidemic in my community, I know, and one of the problems is that any substance that can be abused, and alcohol and marijuana are both substances that can be used and they can be abused, is subject to being abused. And if you throw open the doors and say, okay, we are going to allow another drug of abuse, another something that can do harm.
Whoa. Got to stop Josh on that one. You can never let these guys get away with saying, oh, well, we're introducing another drug, as if marijuana doesn't exist now. As if a bunch of people aren't smoking it now. 1 out of 7 Oregonians are smoking it every year. This is the other part of the argument that needs to be made, is I think a lot of people, when they come at this argument, they don't feel that there's anything about it that affects them, right? Like, well, I don't smoke pot. What do I care? I don't even like potheads. What do I care? No, we have to point out, we're talking about 1 out of 7 Oregon adults. Somebody you know is affected by this. Somebody you know directly is affected by this. You may not know they're pot smokers because it's illegal and they got to hide that fact, but 1 out of 7. And that's who will admit it to a government pollster on the telephone asking them if they're breaking state and federal laws. So it may be even more than 1 out of 7. You got to make this point. There has to be a problem to be solved, and it has to affect all of us, or nobody listening gives a shit.
And in some cases do good, you're going to have kids that are going to use it. And frankly, at the moment, it is a Class A felony with a presumptive prison sentence to furnish controlled substances like marijuana to a minor. We don't prosecute them very often, but I don't expect anything in this bill to change that.
My next question, addressed to Mr. Marquis. If marijuana were to become legal in Oregon, we may see Oregonians driving under its influence. With no accurate marijuana impairment test currently available for law enforcement, how would we protect the public from impaired drivers? How would you address concerns about increased danger from commercial vehicle operators like airline pilots and bus drivers operating vehicles under the influence of marijuana?
That is an excellent question, and marijuana is radically different from other drugs in that it is fat soluble. And what that means is, if somebody is consuming alcohol, we have an easy test that we can give them. Either they go into a machine or we take a blood sample. We can tell exactly what your blood alcohol level was when you left this room, assuming you were consuming alcohol at lunch. We can tell pretty well the same thing with OxyContin, Xanax, and any other number of drugs. But because marijuana is fat soluble, all we can tell, and I've tried these cases, I've tried DUIs with marijuana, and the answer is, well, all I can tell you is this person's positive for marijuana. That means they might have smoked marijuana 2 hours ago, or they might have smoked it 2 days ago, or they might have smoked it 2 weeks ago. And so, no, there is no current technology that enables us, unlike all the other drugs of abuse, legal and otherwise, to be able to determine that. And I just would end by saying, if you're coming back from a ski vacation from Mount Hood, how would you feel knowing that the person driving the other way has just consumed a bunch of their newly legalized marijuana on the road?
All right. Every time this comes up, once again, this falls into that logical fallacy that the prohibitionists have, as if we legalize marijuana, suddenly there will exist marijuana. As if nobody's driving from Mount Hood right now after smoking a few bowls on the lift. My ski friends tell me that's almost a damn requirement for skiing. So whenever they bring this DUI stuff up, the way to respond to that is, Josh, how many DUIs for drugs were prosecuted in Oregon last year? Are you trying to tell me that right now we have no way of prosecuting someone who's driving under the influence of marijuana? It's impossible right now? Right now, people smoke. 1 out of 7 Oregon adults smoke, and you're trying to tell me that suddenly, if we legalize marijuana, there's going to be a problem with stoned drivers on the road? As a matter of fact, Mr. Marquis, and you can look these stats up yourself, Oregon's DUI stats, Oregon's driving fatality stats, driving accident stats are at their lowest recorded levels ever. Our workplace safety stats are at their lowest recorded level ever. If legalizing marijuana suddenly meant there's going to be a rash of stone driver crashes on the freeways, how come in 1998, when we legalized medical marijuana, we didn't see a rash of stone drivers crashing on the freeways? How come now, when we've got 50,000 legal medical marijuana patients who are entitled to have 680 grams of marijuana, we're not seeing a rash of stone drivers crashing on the freeways? Anyway.
For a rebuttal response.
Yes. Driving is a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege that can be revoked. We really think that Oregonians are waiting for marijuana to be legal so we can use it while driving. They ask you if you think you would be using it while driving if it was legal. I don't think that people are waiting for that to go into place. The Measure 80 leaves the tough penalties for driving under the influence in place. There are already tests in Europe that use mouth swabs to detect cannabis recent use, and our initiative will fund new development of new technology, new tests, so that law enforcement can enforce driving under the influence and safety on our roads.
My next question to Mr. Stanford. The state of Washington just got rid of state-run stores for the sale of hard alcohol, and many Oregonians are talking about getting rid of state-run liquor stores regulated by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Measure 80 proposes setting up a system of marijuana retail outlets regulated by a similar commission. Why set up a regulatory system for the sale of marijuana modeled on a system that many consider out of date?
The state of Washington is also voting on a marijuana legalization bill and regulating its I-502. The state of Colorado is voting this year as well on a similar bill, Amendment 64. So we designed this, again, to be upheld in court. Part of that is having the Central State Commission take control of the market. So rather than having it meld with Oregon's Liquor Control Commission, which a lot of Oregonians have questions about the way it's run, we decided to create a new commission. So the governor will appoint a commission for the first year, and those commissioners will implement new administrative rules and regulations to control the market.
Okay, so, not this whole thing about the Oregon Liquor Control Commission and how the Oregon, Cannabis Commission might work. You got to understand there's some history in Oregon about that. Maybe you even know more than I do. I've been around here a long time, but, there's been accusations of corruption and fraud with the Liquor Control Commission, and people didn't like how it worked, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of a running theme here in Oregon is, oh my God, well, the state was in the liquor business and that kind of sucked. So why would we want to get in the cannabis business? Let's hear from Marquis' follow-up here.
Well, I urge you to read the Cannabis Act. One of the things that's disturbing about it is just frankly the almost religious zeal it seems to have for cannabis and hemp. I mean, it will cure your impotence, your lumbago, it will get you up for breakfast, it will solve world peace, and really, just about everything else is in the first couple of pages. But to the point, I would suggest you look at section 2, where it talks about a state commission being created. The governor would appoint 7 people, 5 of the commissioners to be elected at large by growers and processors. Never heard of such. I mean, you have a marijuana commission run, and the response is, it's just like the Blueberry Commission. I'm sorry, marijuanas are not blueberries and filberts.
Here's the thing. That's tough. Marquis gets in a haymaker on that one because in the Measure 80, it does set up a cannabis commission that is 5 out of 7 of the positions are appointed by the growers themselves to get to run that. Now, the response that you have for that is not that we were going to run it like the Blueberry Commission, because again, you heard how that gets shot down. Marijuana ain't blueberries. And one of the issues that we have in this community, he made the little joke about, well, marijuana is going to cure everything from your hangnails to, whatever, right? That's the joke we get, the hippy dippy sun and light, marijuana, hemp can save the planet. Marijuana is the wonder drug that works wonders. And we lose in the public debate with that. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying it's not true. It's absolutely true. But we lose in the public debate for that because we come off as all what my wife calls woo-woo. That whole, woo, hemp can save the world, ring my bells and have fun, right? No, this is supposed to be a serious public policy debate. So when he comes off on that, you know, and he's saying, you know, that this hemp can save the world stuff and it's going to cure everything, we need to back off of that. And we need to kind of seed that ground because the general public sees that as well. We need to be able to say, no. Nobody's saying that, you know, marijuana is going to cure everything and it's going to, you know, save the economy. But in the situation we're in now, can we afford to push off any possible aid, any possible economy, any possible jobs that we might get out of this industry? And the response to the whole thing about the board being made up of self-appointed, you know, people is not to go to the Blueberry Board, but go right to the state of Oregon's pharmacy board or the state of Oregon, you know, anything that's roughly analogous, right? If we have an analog. I believe when it comes to the state of Oregon's pharmacy board, there is some sort of, you know, it's mostly pharmacists. Well, of course, yes, that's who you'd want on that board.
Well, and plus that's, you know, those are appointed after the first year by the members of the cannabis community. The first year, the entire committee is appointed by is it the governor, right?
Yeah. It's only after the first year that we would get to.
You know, it's after the first year. So I mean, serious.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's go back here.
My next question to Mr. Marquis. The NAACP Alaska, Oregon, Washington State Area Conference endorsed ballot measure 80, noting that African Americans have been arrested for marijuana use at higher rates than white adults. How would the passage of measure 80 affect communities of color in Oregon? How would the passage of measure 80 affect communities of color in Oregon?
It would not affect communities of color in Oregon. With all due respect, if you look at it in this audience, I think this looks like an overwhelmingly white audience.
Oh boy! How this
really?
I really want to just clip this part out here and just mail it to the NAACP.
Hey, I've got it from another angle too, so we can.
We'll do that because basically
Really?
you're saying that the legalization thing won't be a big deal for communities of color because we're so white, because Oregon's so white. Really, boy, that's
a way to win votes.
Yeah, one hell of a defense there.
Let's sway the public there. Yeah,
let's let him continue.
It may be part of that as a city, but also this is the subject. Marijuana is an interest, frankly, less of an interest to the communities of color than it is for middle-class white people. The key issue there is arrest. There are many parts of this country where police can use as a pretext the mere possession of a small amount of marijuana, and that's the concern of the NAACP, that officers are using it as a pretext to arrest young black males and other people of color. In Oregon, you can't do that because, as we talked about earlier, possession of less than an ounce is not a crime, and an officer cannot use that to detain someone for further searching.
All right, so here's the situation where we're stuck because at the outset of this, the frame was set that nobody really gets arrested for marijuana, and nobody's really going to jail for it, and he further buttresses this by saying it's not going to hurt the communities of color because they're trying to do stop and frisk and they're trying to do pretextual searches, and they can't do that because they can't arrest people. Bullshit. They can still pull people over on the side of the road, have them sit outside their car at 2 a.m. for 30 minutes while dogs go through and tear the shit out of their interior. That's the kind of thing that can happen, and that's the kind of thing that's going to happen more often to people of color who are not just getting pulled over because the cops are trying to do some sort of pretextual marijuana stop. You ever heard of driving while brown? I mean, come on now. This doesn't get just completely knocked out of the park is so disappointing to me.
Mr. Stanford, your rebuttal in response.
Here in Oregon, African Americans make up 2% of the population. They're 9% of our prison population. Often, when people are violated for probation, parole infractions, it's because they have tested positive for or are in possession of marijuana.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now we're getting to the meat of it, is the fact that it's not just whether or not you're caught with a little bit of weed on you and you're going to jail. It's that it affects so many other things. It affects your probation, affects your parole, your housing, your child custody, your job career, your job prospects, the chance of meeting somebody. I mean, the arrest is not the big deal. The arrest is really not the big deal of marijuana. It's the illegality. It's the fact that people who use marijuana are punished and considered to be bad. So good answer there.
The NAACP endorsed Measure 80 because they see the harm that drug prohibition causes their community. So our initiative will restore sanity to this debate and in marijuana.
We will now return to allowing each debater to have 60 seconds to answer. My question to Mr. Marquis. A 2009 report by the California police chiefs found that medical marijuana dispensary operators have been assaulted, minors have been sold marijuana, and there is loitering, increased traffic and noise, and robberies of customers just outside dispensaries. A different 2012 study from UCLA found no correlation between the presence of marijuana retailers and an increase in crime. Mr. Marquis, if Measure 80 passes, how can the marijuana retail system develop in ways that support public safety? Mr. Stanford, what is the likelihood that neighborhoods in Oregon with retail marijuana outlets will face an increase in crime? Mr. Marquis?
My opposition to Measure 80 is not that if you have a marijuana dispensary, you're all of a sudden going to get a bunch of junkies hanging around, you're going to boost your car and hijack you. I don't think that's the problem. The problem, again, is blowing the doors off access to marijuana, which is already pretty much available in Oregon. It's sort of a red herring argument. I'm not claiming that dispensaries. By the way, Oregonians rejected dispensaries 2 years ago. Pretty overwhelming. I think Paul was involved in that as well. So my concern is not that that if this passes, the dispensaries that are going to exist are going to create crime. It's the other issue is that marijuana is already pretty much available. There's very little downside to possessing it. Why on earth would we want to get involved in a giant grudge match with the U.S. Department of Justice? Paul can say, well, we wrote it to be upheld. Everybody likes these measures to be upheld. We're going to be going up against the Justice Department.
And again, why is that such a big problem to go up against the federal Justice Department? We did it with Death with Dignity. Why would we not go up against them on this? I still fail to see why that's an argument. Oh, feds might not like it. Oh, gosh, we better not do it.
Stanford, your response.
According to Jeffrey Meyer, an economist at Harvard, we'll see savings in the criminal justice system, everything from arresting, prosecuting, and incarcerating marijuana growers, dealers, and probation parole violators of over $60 million a year. Those resources can be reallocated to enforcing crimes such as robbery to make our neighborhoods safer. I'd just like you to think for a moment, if you had someone breaking into your home, how would you feel to know that the police are tied up with the marijuana arrest? They can't come and enforce that law. In fact, that happened in Oakland, California, when they raided several dispensaries in California. At the same time that raid was going on, a crazy person went to a local college and shot and killed 7 people. Right when that call went out, the police were surrounding the vehicle to haul away the marijuana from the dispensary.
But again, we've never addressed the frame that people aren't really getting arrested and there's only 10 people in jail for possession, right? So as you're making that point about, how would you feel if someone was breaking into your home while cops were busy arresting someone for marijuana? It's hard to make that stand because people are thinking, well, wait, ounce or less, right? It's only a ticket. They're not being diverted for the whole marijuana thing.
Mr. Marquis.
To make sure I understand what that is.
Right. Mr. Stanford, what is the likelihood that neighborhoods in Oregon with retail marijuana outlets will face an increase in crime?
I think that crime rates would go down because the law enforcement would be able to concentrate their resources on people who are robbing places, not on marijuana growers and people.
All right, so if you didn't know, in this debate, the moderators, there's like 3 panel judges or something off to the right that you can't see, and they, if a person is, if one of the debaters is asked a question and they don't feel like the person answered the question, they have these big pieces of paper with a question mark on it that they hold up, kind of like, answer the question. So they had just raised their cards there to say, answer the question. That's why it got restated again and asked to Paul. And those are good enough responses in that, they have more, they can concentrate on more, other crimes. But let's be a little more, explicit about it, right? First of all, will the crime rate go down if marijuana is legalized? Well, by definition, it will go down, because suddenly 550,000 Oregonians who smoke pot are no longer criminals. So by definition, we've already eliminated a whole bunch of crime. And then on top of that, as far as reducing crime, people that now want to get marijuana have a place to go get it, instead of possibly thinking about ripping it off from somebody else. And for those guys that might even go forward and try to rip it off from somebody else, who are they going to sell it to? And how are they going to sell it when they're so undercut by the legal market? And when people, even if they're not undercut by the legal market, think of it this way. If I was offering to sell you a case of beer, or even worse, let's say some moonshine, right? Why do people go and spend $30 for a bottle of tequila rather than going to some guy who's squeezing out some tequila of his own, little homebrew tequila for $15? Why does that not happen? Because once it's legalized, the market gets the price set to a point where people really can't compete that well against the legalized market.
All right. My next question begins with you, Mr. Stanford. Proponents claim Oregon gets $140 million in new tax revenues and saves $60 million in law enforcement costs if Measure 80 passes. Mr. Stanford, how do you support those claims? Mr. Marquis, what's the economic impact of Oregon's law enforcement, judicial, and correction systems if Measure 80 passes?
All right, before these answers come, let me just offer my opinion on the whole, marijuana legalization is going to save this much or make this much. I think it's a bad idea to peg an exact number on something like that, or to even try to give estimates, because there's really no way of telling. First of all, the law enforcement savings things, right? Like, okay, so now the cops aren't writing tickets for minor marijuana possession. That doesn't mean they're off the job. That doesn't mean they're not getting paid during that time. So as far as the law enforcement savings, I always wonder how we can really stand behind that, because I've worked in state governments, I've worked in bureaucracies, and if you have a budget, you spend it. You don't, like, if suddenly there's no marijuana crimes to go bust, and we keep talking about, Paul keeps saying cops will be able to be freed up to go after real crimes. Right, exactly. So the money that we spend on cops that had been spent on marijuana arrests or gross side arrests or whatever is now being spent on cops busting meth labs or, tracking down rapists or something. But it's still being spent, right? So that whole thing about the law enforcement savings, I'm always leery of trying to use that. And the thing about how much money we'll make, that's complete wild ass guessing. We have no idea what we'll make. What will the price of marijuana eventually settle at? We can't really, we can guess, we can have all sorts of estimations. How much marijuana will people use when it's legal? We can guess, we can have some estimations, but the problem of putting a firm number on this is you subject yourself to being shot down when someone can show an equation or someone can show a study that pokes a hole in your number. The point to be made here isn't how much we'll be making, it's that we're leaving anything on the table in these very severe economic times. I don't care if legalizing the industrial hemp market makes $10 million for Oregon, $1 million for Oregon, or $100,000 for Oregon. Doesn't matter what the actual number is. It will make something for Oregon. And right now, we're spending money to try to stop it and not succeeding. So we'll stop spending some money. We'll start gaining some money. I can't tell you what the exact numbers would be, but logic seems to dictate to me that a legal market where we can reap tax revenues and create jobs is better than giving a price support to marijuana that enriches drug dealers.
Mr. Stanford.
We took those figures again from Jeffrey Meyer, economist at Harvard University. has a website, prohibitioncosts.org, and he estimated the savings across the United States and said that we'd see savings of over $60 billion a year. So we're using those figures.
This came up in a debate. I'm sorry, you're done? We had a debate, we had a discussion with the East Oregon Publishing Company yesterday, and he used those same numbers, and I said, where did they come from? And he got sort of the answer, he said that Clatson County was $1 million. My budget is $1.2 million. Here, Paul, here's $10. This is the amount of money that I believe that is spent on my salary that covers marijuana in 1 year. The answer.
See what I mean? Clatson County's entire district attorney budget is $1.2 million. And the figures that come from the Myron study, according to him here, are $1 million of marijuana. And everybody, I will completely grant that Josh Marquis' job, very little of it has to do with enforcing minor possession of marijuana out there. So here you are, we set ourselves up with a big number, and it just gets ripped to shreds. And especially what a little stage move there too, to bring the $10 over. I mean, I got to say, as far as stagecraft goes, that's big. I mean, that hurt.
Your question directly. DAs, there was a letter to the editor in one of the Portland papers saying district attorneys and sheriffs will lose their jobs if they don't have it. We don't make money off prosecuting marijuana cases. The money goes.
All right. Now, anytime that comes up, you can say, you may not make money, Josh Marquis, but the Interagency Drug Task Force sure makes money. There's such a thing called asset forfeiture, and when you go pull up one of these marijuana gardens, oftentimes the cops seize all the cash they can find, they seize all the valuables and assets and say that they were ill-gotten proceeds of marijuana distribution. So there's a whole lot of profit motive in going after people that have got marijuana in their house.
Goes to the state general fund. There's a relatively low level of enforcement. We frankly have better things to do. Cops they're out rousing drug people, they're out rousing people for methamphetamine, which is a much greater risk for them.
All right, my next question will begin with Mr. Marquis. A Willamette Week article published in August calls the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, quote, by far the most expansive and least restrictive of the legalization measures currently before voters, end quote, in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. For example, in Oregon's measure, there is no limit on personal possession of marijuana, while there is a limit proposed in Washington and Colorado. Mr. Marquis, what challenges does this pose? Mr. Stanford, why is the ballot measure written this way?
Well, it is a huge problem because, again, first off, you can possess up to an ounce, which, if memory serves from my college days, is about 15 to 20 joints, which ought to keep you happy for a relatively long period of time.
Mr. Marquis, do you think you'd be district attorney of Clatson County if during your college days you'd been caught with a lid?
If you have a medical marijuana card, you can possess 1.5 pounds at any given time, which is a whopping amount of marijuana. So the idea that specifically the challenge it presents is if there's no limit, what is somebody doing with 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 pounds of marijuana? The answer is they're reselling them. And they're probably not doing it through the dispensary plan. They're probably selling them the way illegal and illicit drugs are sold now, or alcohol is sold to kids who, cluster around the local stop block trying to get people to buy booze from them.
All right, I've been thinking about this one for a long time because this one is tough. Oregon Cannabis Tax Act allows unlimited personal possession, unlimited cultivation, while Washington and Colorado's legalization measures have that set to 1 ounce of personal possession. And Washington doesn't let you grow at home, and Colorado limits it at 3 plants if they pass. So the point in the question there, oh my God, it's the most expansive, it's the most liberal, it allows unlimited, would that be a problem? And Marquis comes back and says, well, yeah, someone's got, 6, 10, 12, 15 pounds, they're selling it. There's only one possible response to this. And as far as I can tell, there's only one way that you can make this work. And here's the way I would go at this. I would say, under Oregon law right now, if you're caught with a gram of marijuana, you get a ticket, you get a fine, and you get your driver's license suspended for 6 months, whether you were driving or not. You can have up to 28 grams and still get a ticket, a fine, and your driver's license suspended. But if you have 29 grams, suddenly you're a felon deserving of 5 years in prison. I think our cops have better things to do. Oh, and not only that, you're a felon if you got that 29 grams, unless you're sick. Then you can have 680 grams. I mean, does that make any sense? And why should we burden our cops with having to carry around scales trying to figure out who's worth a ticket and who's worth a felony? What we need to do here is to recognize that personal use and possession is personal use and possession. Right now, if cops want to bust someone for selling marijuana, that person has to be selling it, right? If they're possessing it, they can only possess it, and they bust them for that. Now, there is possession with intent to distribute and all of that. But the point I'm trying to make here is, after Measure 80 passes, if that person's got 10, 15, 20 pounds in his garage, when he sells it, bust him. Bust him for the act of selling it. We don't have a law that says I can't have 15 beautiful women in my house, because obviously if you have 15 beautiful women in your house, you must be running a whorehouse. No, I can have 1,000 beautiful women in my house if I want, so long as none of them is screwing anyone for money. The minute even one of them screws someone for money, it doesn't matter if I have 1 in the house, 10 in the house, or 100 in the house, I'm running a whorehouse. Similarly, it doesn't matter whether a person's got a gram in the garage or a ton in the garage. It's the moment he sells it that we've got a problem with. I don't care if he's selling a gram illegally, that's going to be illegal. That's the defense I've got for that. That's the reaction. That's the way I think that you should push that, is that it's silly to try to say a certain amount is personal and above that it has to be for sale. How many bottles of beer can I have in my fridge? How many bottles of tequila can I have in my liquor shelf? If I have 100 bottles of tequila, does that mean, of course I must be selling it? I mean, it's ridiculous to make cops try to decide the intent of someone based on the amount of something they have. It doesn't make any sense. That's the way I would fight that. Here's Paul's response.
Mr. Marquis. Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
I've helped a lot of different medical patients cultivate marijuana. Some of them grow small plants, and some of them grow larger plants. So we didn't impose a limit on it because we didn't know exactly what that limit should be.
We didn't impose a limit on it because we didn't know what that limit should be. Here we are, the people proposing the legalization of marijuana. We are proposing changing the state law to be in direct conflict with the federal government, but we don't know how much the limit should be. We couldn't figure it out, so we didn't put one in.
I just, the only thing that struck me about that is he went back to the medical thing. Yes, he didn't bring up how he's helped, grow for years, but whatever.
Yeah.
My next question will begin with Mr. Stanford. Is there any middle ground that proponents and opponents would support between outright legalization as proposed by Measure 80 and the current state law? Mr. Stanford.
I believe there's a middle ground. The allowing adults to possess and buy cannabis would be a good first step to raise revenue. That's certainly open for debate. The legislature so far, in terms of medical marijuana, has failed to impose a licensing system on the medical marijuana market. So I believe there's certainly a lot of middle ground for debate. Our initiative would allow the legislature to revise that. They could look at this and change the law as they see fit, be open to debate, and we welcome that.
Well, let me be as direct as I can. I think the middle ground is the only way to resolve this and not bring the federal government down on this is the reclassification of marijuana as a a Schedule II drug by the federal government. That's already been done, by the way, by our state pharmacy board, but it's meaningless. So if all of the parties got together and convinced our federal legislative delegation, which probably would not be thrilled to be asked to do this, but to get together with other legislators and say, look, it's crazy to be saying marijuana is as dangerous as heroin and LSD and ecstasy. Let's reschedule.
Let's reschedule it and say it's as dangerous as cocaine and methamphetamine. Jeez. Okay, middle ground argument, right? Marquis has this thing. It's kind of the Kevin Sabetish thing. I'm not this crazy. Of course, marijuana is not as bad as heroin. It's just as bad as cocaine. Jesus. I want to appear to be the moderate guy. I had some weed back in college. I'm not some stuffy shirt, God. Look, the question is, do we punish people for their private use of marijuana or not? All Schedule II does is once again say you need a medical excuse to use marijuana or we're going to put you in a cage. What the middle ground I would support? Yeah, I believe there's middle ground. The middle ground is stop punishing people for their personal private use of marijuana. Now, I could give some ground on what personal private use of marijuana entails. I can give ground on a 1 ounce limit. Okay, 1 ounce limit, personal private use, fine. I think it's silly, but all right, fine. Can't grow at home, can't grow my own. I have to buy it from some store somewhere. Well, that sucks, but we can give a little on that. That's fine. I'd even give in on something like a stoner's license, a marijuana license, right? Think about like how if you want to go fishing or hunting, you have to go buy a fishing license, right? Hunting license, right? Well, why not a stoner license, right? And then if you don't have your stoner license, you get a fine or something like that. I could even get behind something like that. I'd be fine with it. That's the middle ground I've got. But we cannot give ground on the point, and this is where Marquis let off the hook here. We are punishing people, adults, in their homes who use marijuana. Now, they may not get arrested, but they get tickets. And when they get tickets, they get fines. And when they get fines, they get their driver's license suspended, and all sorts of things happen after that.
Paul keeps talking about money. I don't think the first thing we ought to be thinking about in public safety can help us how much money can we make off of this. I think the question ought to be, if this is a drug that can be abused, how can we limit it to those people who need it and not have it basically run wild on the community?
Now I will once again direct a question to one debater who will get 60 seconds. The second debater will have 45 seconds to rebut. My first question to Mr. Marquis. According to an article in the Atlantic Monthly, there may be more people in prison today for violating marijuana laws than at any other time in the nation's history. Calculations based on data provided by the Bureau of Prisons and the U.S. Sentencing Commission suggest that 1 of every 6 inmates in the federal prison system, that's roughly 15,000 people, have been incarcerated primarily for a marijuana offense. In light of the significant budget shortfalls at the federal and state levels, should these statistics be viewed as a sign of success or an indictment of the war on drugs?
We're not here to debate the war on drugs. We're here to debate Measure 80, which will not affect federal law but state law. Keep in mind, federal prisons have about 190,000 people in custody. State prisons have approximately 1.2 million. So federal laws are draconian for marijuana. The number of, like I said, I did my math. There are, even if you extend it maximum, 10 people in prison in Oregon out of 15,000 for marijuana possession greater than an ounce. And all of them have extensive records, and almost every one of them is a plea down from manufacturing. So we're talking about Oregon, changing Oregon's law. We don't have the ability to change the federal law. We can try to, but in Oregon, we are not locking up 1 out of every 6, 1 out of every 60, or even 1 out of every 6,000 Oregonians over marijuana.
Yeah, we're not locking anyone up. But year after year, we have hundreds or even thousands of people that get arrested, that have an interface with law enforcement, that are looked down by their community, that are in danger of losing their financial aid, that could possibly lose their housing. Again, since we never attacked that frame at the beginning, we keep getting hammered in it. We keep getting beaten up over the fact that there's no problem to solve. What problem are you trying to solve? What terrible thing? What's wrong with our laws that we have right now? We got decrim. We got medical. We don't have any problems here.
Mr. Stanford, your response.
If all three of the states that have marijuana laws pass these, or even one of them do, it'll send a strong message to the federal government that the states and the people are tired of the consequences of prohibition. Our initiative that we believe, just as the death with dignity law was enjoined when it passed in 1994, will be enjoined by the federal government. In that law, the case was fast-tracked, and 2 years later it was upheld in Gonzalez versus Oregon. I believe the same thing will happen with Measure 80 when it passes. It will be enjoined by the federal government, the Supreme Court will review it, and that will change the drug schedule. We can take marijuana out of the Schedule 1 status it currently has, with the Supreme Court's direction.
My next question to Mr. Stanford. The Oregon legislature already supports agriculture hemp. So why include hemp in a measure that seems focused on marijuana cultivation, use, and sale? Mr. Stanford.
The artificial economic barriers imposed by marijuana prohibition have prohibited hemp for fuel, oil, fiber, and food. There's no state in this country, and 7 or 8 states have passed hemp laws that's allowed to cultivate hemp for fuel, fiber, and food. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that the majority of it is imported from Canada. Oregon can lead the way in providing hemp for fuel, hemp for food, and hemp for fiber. We can reopen our closed pulp mills, our closed fiberboard mills, and use hemp as a resource. I really believe that hemp is going to be the main economic engine compared to the drug market. I think it will dwarf the drug market, and that's one of the primary motivations I have for putting Measure 80 out.
This gets back to this idea that sort of, marijuana and hemp are the answer to all of our problems. If this measure were just about making, so people understand, essentially, hemp is sort of male marijuana, and then the flowering portion, which is female, produces the buds which contain THC. There's very, very tiny quantities of THC in ordinary hemp, and you would be smoking banana peels before you would get probably higher soon than hemp. If this was about hemp, we wouldn't be having a debate. We wouldn't really care. And it's true that there are some barriers to it. But to get back to the question, what this is the part of this. This isn't about agriculture. This is about legalizing a drug. And by the way, 12 years ago, 14 years ago, all these sports said, this is a drug, we need to get it to the people who need it. And now they say, oh no, never mind that discussion. We don't want to have that one.
This question is the last question for.
Yeah, I got to come back on the hemp thing there too, because that's another case where the case isn't made of what the problem is to solve. What is the issue? What about our hemp situation right now is so bad, right? We can talk all we want about how great hemp is and how many jobs it would create for farmers and how to do this and how to do that and all the economic benefits. That's all wonderful. But what problem are we solving now with respect to hemp? The sob story of the farmer needs to be brought up here. The poor Oregon farmer. The poor Oregon farmer who's faced, and look, I'm not going to pretend to know anything about agriculture, right? Somebody email me. But I don't know a damn thing about agriculture, but I'm sure there's a sob story out there to be made. Poor farmer, the economy crashed. There was a drought, whatever. Find the story for me. But you come up with a story that shows, look how you can help this man. Look how you can help our farmers. Our farmers are desperate. Our family farms are going under. Ecologically, we need replenishing of the topsoil for growing other crops, and hemp does that better than anything else. Ecologically, we're facing all sorts of problem with greenhouse gases. Hemp provides a way that we can produce fuel that we don't have to burn greenhouse gases to get. I mean, there's a way to sell this, and Paul does a good job. Paul knows hemp better than anybody I know. So this is a case that can be made, but it has to be made not from how great the future will be, but how bad the present is. What terrible thing is happening because hemp is not legal right today.
Both of our debaters, and will be addressed to Mr. Marquis. Physicians have expressed the need for better research on the drug to provide more informed patient counsel. Meanwhile, a group of governors is urging the federal government to reclassify marijuana so that the drug is more widely accepted for medical treatment. Is the limited scientific evidence of the possible benefits and detriments of cannabis a barrier in setting public policy and helping voters to make an informed choice? Mr. Marquis.
Well, Paul and I might actually agree on this. They probably are. By submitting in Schedule 1, it basically makes it virtually impossible, except for very special permission, to do any kind of research. So I think there are legitimate medical uses for marijuana, not nearly as many as probably Mr. Stanford thinks. Keep in mind, this is not about medical marijuana. But to answer your question, yes, I think it probably is an impediment. And again, if the federal government, and by the way, the U.S. Supreme Court that would do it, the case he's talking about, Gonzalez versus Oregon, dealt with the then Attorney General trying to go after doctors in this state that were prescribing pentobarbital for people who wanted to end their lives. Pentobarbital is a Schedule 2 drug, and basically what the Supreme Court said, you can't get between the doctor and the patient. The problem is marijuana is currently a Schedule 1 drug, and that's the issue that's to be addressed.
Mr. Stanford.
We believe that Measure 80 will regulate the market and take it out of the hands of the kids and substance abusers who control it today. Currently, kids have easier access to marijuana than adults. So our initiative is specifically designed to lower the use of marijuana by teens. We believe we establish firm policies to start. Can I ask you to restate that question?
Is the limited scientific evidence on the possible benefits and detriments of cannabis a barrier in setting public policy and helping voters to make an informed choice?
Marijuana has been studied probably more than any other substance known to man. It is continually reviewed, and there's a lot of evidence to show that it is fairly innocuous. So, hope that answers that.
We will now move to the final.
I don't know if I need to tell you that, when you're in a debate and you start answering a question with a stock stump speech and then halfway through ask, what was the question? It doesn't look good.
Final portion of the program. 3-minute closing statements from each debater. We will begin with Mr. Marquis.
Thank you. I don't think I'll need 3 minutes. I think what you've heard is a lot of arguments about why if the federal government would do this, if Oregon would just take the lead, then the scales will fall from their eyes at the Supreme Court, and the federal government will do the whole thing. Again, we haven't talked. The fact of the matter is that you're not going to jail in Oregon for possession of marijuana. The police cannot arrest you for possession of small amounts. If you get caught with felony possession of marijuana, your odds are about as, only slightly worse than winning the lottery, then you might actually go to prison. And if you get a medical marijuana card, that's probably easier than getting a driver's license. You can possess 1.5 pounds of marijuana.
Okay, hold on just a minute, Mr. Marquis. It's get a medical marijuana card that's as easy as getting a driver's license, and you can have 1.5 pounds of marijuana.
No, he said easier.
Easier.
He said easier.
Easier. First of all, Mr. Marquis, when you get your driver's license in the state of Oregon, it's good for 8 years before you have to get it renewed. What's the cost for the license? Do you know? What are they? Driver's license?
I don't know.
I'll look up on DMV here. Let's see what we can find. DMV.
I don't
Oregon
have
DMV.
my license. Because
DMV.
I'm not going to be an impaired driver.
Driver's license renewal. Let's just see what that costs.
I think it's about $75 to $90.
$75 maybe? Yeah, let's see. Driver's licensing and ID card fees. State of Oregon. Driver's license, Class C, non-commercial, $60.
$60.
$60.
And
So,
if you have a vehicle, though, also there's the registration.
no, let's not even talk about that. $60 to get my driver's license.
Okay.
$40 to get my renewal, and I have to do that every 8 years. When you get your medical marijuana card here in the state of Oregon, you've got to renew it every year, and it costs $200. So right off the bat, even if all things were equal, not as easy to get a medical marijuana card as it is to get a driver's license. Furthermore, to get a medical marijuana card in the state of Oregon, you must have one or a combination of conditions that are very specifically listed in the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. They include cancer, AIDS, cachexia, glaucoma, severe pain, severe seizures, nausea, and chronic... there's another one in there. I always forget one. But there's 8. Okay? 8 conditions. Now, in order for the person who's going to sign your medical marijuana card to be able to acknowledge those conditions, they can't just take your word for it. They have got to get their medical records. Not just one medical record, but 3 medical records that are within the past 6 months, or within the past 3 years, with at least one visit being in the past 6 months. Then, another doctor has to go and review all of that. Now, understand, getting your medical records is not always easy. I mean, under HIPAA laws, they have to do it for you, but it can take time. And some clinics will even charge patients money for that. And anyway, so you got to get all your medical records together, and you've got to present them to a clinic doctor, and that person's got to review your records and make sure you do actually qualify. They're going to sign a recommendation. Oh, and by the way, that costs money. Those doctors don't do it for free, right? So you've been to the doctor at least 3 times in the past 3 years. Of course, that costs money too. And then you pay the clinic doctor to get your recommendation, and then you go to the state of Oregon and pay $200 to get your medical marijuana card, and another $50 if you want to have someone growing for you. And let me tell you a little tale also about that new little fee system they got set up. I heard of a case just the other day of a patient who, desperate patients like we have, because we don't have dispensaries here, they've got to find a grower. They got to find someone who will grow marijuana for them. So they find someone, right, who, let's just say, is not the most reputable person, someone who's maybe had been a black market dealer and now is using the medical marijuana program. That person, in order to become the grower for that patient, required the patient to make the grower's girlfriend the caregiver. Even though the grower's girlfriend has nothing to do with helping the patient, who's a complete stranger, remember, right? In order for that grower to want to help that patient out, had to spread that umbrella of protection to the grower's girlfriend. Now, of course, this patient has been having problems with this grower because this patient's not getting the medicine they were promised. They're having all sorts of issues with respect to how much medicine and how much the reimbursement should be, yada, yada, yada. So this patient wants to change their caregiver and their grower. But guess what? In order to change that, you got to pay another $200 for your card and another $50 grower fee. So we have a situation in the state of Oregon where once you've paid your $250, you're kind of locked into that person come hell or high water, good grower, good person, bad person, criminal or following the law to the letter, doesn't matter. You're locked into that person for a year, unless you got another $250 to spend. So excuse me, Josh Marquis, I'm severely offended at the idea that it's as easier to get a medical marijuana card than it is to get a goddamn driver's license in the state of Oregon. And you'd think a clinic owner could rebut that.
Where's the problem? There just is no problem. The alternative to that, which they're suggesting, is let's not do it incrementally anymore. Let's make it a cash crop available to anybody. And one of the questions that I'd like us to know is how much money does Mr. Stanford make off the marijuana trade? He's an entrepreneur, and I'm assuming he will become a much wealthier entrepreneur if this passes.
And there we have another problem in the campaign, another situation that we have to deal with. When you looked at Prop 19, While Richard Lee did put it together, did fund it, he got a lot of attacks. A lot of attacks from growers, and a lot of attacks from the community about trying to set up some sort of Oakland monopoly. He had his own personal financial interests at stake, right? He got a lot of those attacks. But still, he put Dale Sky Jones, Dale Jones, and Jeff Jones in the front of the campaign, so they wouldn't have to face those attacks from the opponents. And in Washington State, you got Allison Holcomb, a person who I don't think has ever grown a marijuana plant in her life. I don't even know that she even smokes pot, to tell you the truth. You got Mason Tvert and Brian Vincente. Now, maybe you could make that argument with Brian, since he's a defense attorney. Maybe he, but actually, by supporting legalization, he's trying to put himself out of a job. So that wouldn't really stick. Mason, he's got no, ties to the financial side of this. But in our situation, we have someone who would financially profit a great deal from the passage of Measure 80. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Once it's legal, please make a ton of money. I'm all for that. But it's such an easy attack for our opponents.
As a prosecutor, I have all the customers I want. I'm not looking to put more people in prison. There's always somebody else out there committing a much worse act than possession or even delivery of marijuana that's begging for my time, and all the other prosecutors. But what we've seen the devastation alcohol does in our communities. I think anybody in law enforcement knows that 75 to 80% of all crime is in some way related to substance abuse. That doesn't mean they're being arrested for substance abuse. The substance abuse plays a part in it.
All right, so Brian just made a very good point.
I was just saying that, in that little spot there, he overtly was saying to the public that, hey, possession and even delivery of marijuana is, the one of the least, sought. I mean, we're not
low
caring
priority.
about lowest priority.
It's not a really big deal. It's not a big part of our work. We're having to deal with so many real crimes.
We're not even looking at the people who are smoking.
So what you're telling me then is that it's so off your radar that there's really no reason it needs to be illegal.
So I think that the reason they're scared about the feds coming in is because the feds will actually see that this federal organization is not caring.
Exactly.
So
just like drink responsible, people can enjoy a couple glasses of wine. People, I'm sure, probably can smoke a doobie and sit in their house and listen to music and enjoy it. But then there are other people that will abuse it.
But no, see, here's the thing. He's trying to play that game of, but this is the same game Kevin Sabet played with me. Oh, Russ, we're not worried about you smoking pot. No, you're not. Like you said, you never get busted. You could probably smoke a joint in your house and nobody's going to bother you. But they could. They could. I could have an enemy out there. I could have somebody who doesn't like me makes a anonymous tip to the cops saying I'm growing weed, and they could bust me.
I still have to fear for my safety and my well-being and that of my family and friends who may just be over hanging out.
Yeah. When I'm driving down the street, I have to worry about, do I have weed on me? Can someone smell weed on me?
I have to worry about going into any government building. Oh, crap. Is someone going to where's my Febreze?
And that's the thing that we have to keep pointing out, is that there is a direct effect of prohibition upon law-abiding average citizens that has nothing to do with whether or not they're ever caught.
It's just called discrimination. It's just the newest form.
You guys know how it is, right? Driving down the street, and you see a car behind you, and it's got one of them roof racks, but you can't tell if it's sirens or not. Is that a roof rack or is that a siren? Do you know most people don't live that way?
No.
Most people, when they pull up at a stoplight and there's a cop next to them at the stoplight, they wave and say hi. It's not anything to be afraid of.
I wave and say hi, but not when I've, been smoking recently.
That's what we live under, and that's what we have to express, and that's why I keep coming back to that stat. 1 out of 7 of us are being treated this way. And Josh Marquis keeps making my point. Obviously, we're not that big a deal to you. Obviously, you don't have much of a problem with it. And he keeps trying to tie this substance abuse with crime, substance abuse with crime. Notice it's substance, not marijuana. Not marijuana abuse with crime, substance abuse. And yeah, I'm the first one to say people on meth tend to get a little criminal sometimes. They tend to, rip off catalytic converters and copper off of bridges and stuff like that. People on cocaine sometimes get a little sketchy. People on heroin become very addicted and sometimes get desperate and have to commit crimes. Absolutely. I don't see marijuana people committing crimes. And there was something else he said, maybe it was earlier in the debate and I missed the comment on this, but Marquis he was going off about, oh shit, I forgot. Let me just let this run. I'll remember.
Also give it to their 14-year-old friends. If you take away all the barriers, the few barriers that continue to exist in this state against marijuana, you're going to see an explosion of marijuana even greater. And for all the reasons that we're asking questions in terms of our inability to control what people are driving, and the fact that we just look at our record with alcohol and our ability to keep that a regulated drug out of the hands of kids. We've done a terrible job. And then I just urge everybody to actually read the Cannabis Act. Now Paul said,
Wait a minute, let me come back to that. His last statement where he just said, oh, we just need to look at alcohol and what a terrible job we've done of keeping that out of kids' hands. Oh, so we should go back to prohibition. Really? How come you're not suggesting we go back to prohibition there, Josh? We're doing such a terrible job with regulation of alcohol. Let's go back to the way it was. That doesn't make any sense at all. And the other thing Marquis came to is, this explosion. There could be this explosion of marijuana. And yet, on the other hand, he keeps saying there's a lot of access to marijuana. There's very few barriers to marijuana. There's a ton of marijuana out there. Anybody who wants marijuana can get it. So which is it, Josh? Because in order for there to be explosion after it becomes legal, there have to be a whole bunch of people who aren't smoking it now and can't get it now, who suddenly get it when it's legal. Let me explain something to you. 1 out of 7 adult Oregonians is smoking pot right now. The people who want to smoke pot do. Now, there may be some people out there who don't smoke it because it's illegal, right? And I want to smoke it because it's illegal. But when it becomes legal, it doesn't erase workplace drug testing. So those same people who aren't smoking because they might get popped for a pee test, they're not going to be smoking. The people who aren't going to get popped for a pee test, who can smoke, probably are already. How many of them out there are really not smoking weed just because it's illegal? No, it's because they're afraid of getting caught. It's afraid of getting caught on that pee test. Afraid of the smell on their clothes, right? There may be a few people that will take up, try marijuana. Oh my God, well now it's legal. What the hell? I'll try it. And the people who, like me, who are already smoking marijuana, now that we have access to reliable and safe sources of marijuana, we may smoke more of it. But to say there's going to be an explosion is as if people that, all of a sudden, now that it's legal, are going to want to take drugs. It's not going to work that way. And it doesn't work that way. And our experience with decriminalization since 1973 shows that. We liberalized our law and made it so that you couldn't be arrested, right, Josh? Can't be arrested for having less than an ounce. So did that make a whole bunch of people start taking up marijuana? No. Medical marijuana, got it legalized for people, they get their card as easy as a driver's license, right? Got 50,000 patients, right? Has our marijuana use gone up? No. The studies have shown that the states that have passed medical marijuana laws have not seen an increase in their use of marijuana any greater than any other state out there that doesn't have medical marijuana. And then you got to ask yourself this. If there is a substance called marijuana that people, because it's so bad it's got to be prohibited, and people won't use it now because it's prohibited. But then if we legalized it, suddenly a whole bunch of people would want to use it. You got to ask yourself, why? If it was really as bad as you said it was and justified to be prohibited, wouldn't people get that danger? Wouldn't they think that it's dangerous? The very fact that people want it legalized shows it's not as dangerous as you keep trying to say it is. I had a comment on the YouTube page the other day that someone said, well, how about there be a show about cocaine? Why isn't there a show about heroin? Why isn't there a show about meth? Yeah. Why isn't there? You know why? Because people that use coke, heroin, or meth are into a serious drug lifestyle, and there's a very few of them compared to marijuana smokers.
I'm sure they're not very enthusiastic about their use.
That
could be the other
thing. There's another part of that. So that's the frustrating thing to me, is this idea that there's going to be this explosion of marijuana smoking. If we legalized heroin, do you think there'd be a explosion of heroin use? People would all of a sudden want to start doing heroin? If we legalize cocaine, legalize meth, do you think suddenly everybody's going to be tweakers? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, let's close this thing up.
Oh, don't worry, we'll go back to the legislature. No, you're voting on this act. You're not voting on basically, 7 come 11, the legislature will come in and fix it. You're voting
Mr. Stanford, your closing statement.
You know, over the past 20 years, we've seen a reduction in the use of tobacco and alcohol. They're at record lows. And now we're seeing an increase in marijuana use, and it's at a record high. Number one reason that we were given for criminalizing marijuana is public safety. But the failed war on marijuana is not about public safety. It's after trillions of dollars wasted, countless lives ruined, we have to stand up and say what we're doing has failed and we need a new approach. What we're talking about is reforming laws. One of the messages we get is, what message are we sending kids? I ask, what message are we sending kids when we're cutting education spending, forcing more parents and students to go into debt for school, while continuing to lock up more and more people? The prison incarceration rate is a record high. The United States has more people in prison than any other country in the history of the world. A lot of those people are there for nonviolent crimes. It's driven by the war on marijuana. It's easier for kids to get marijuana than it is liquor. That's why we regulate liquor. We educate people about liquor. Alcohol use is at a historic level, but 8 out of 10 kids say they can get marijuana more easily than alcohol. Street dealers don't ask for ID. Oregonians have a history of tackling tough issues in our own way. We passed the bottle bill, beach access bill, death with dignity, mass transit, the Oregon Health Plan. We have an opportunity to do that again this year with Measure 80. By ending the failed war on marijuana and regulating the industry responsibly, pragmatically, and effectively, we can do that. So I urge you to vote yes on Measure 80 for Oregon's sake, for the safety of our youth, for the prosperity of our economy, for a model that will serve the rest of the nation. Once again, Oregon can lead the way. We've been the pioneer state for 150 years, and we can continue to do that today.
That wraps up our forum for today. As our President-elect, John Corbett, returns to the stage, let's give these gentlemen a big round of applause.
All right, so there you have it. That is the debate from earlier today at the Portland City Club downtown at the Governor Hotel. Coincidentally, Governor Hotel, same location where the normal national conference was here in Portland in 2009. You can see the folks out there's Sam Chapman and Anthony Johnson. Kaliko was back in the back somewhere enjoying it. Red Eyes was back there too.
Yeah, I got some a little bit steadier footage because I had the tripod.
Yeah, you had the tripod.
Yeah, I tried to meet up with you, but there was some miscommunication about location.
I thought I was going to be in Salem at 1.
I thought he was going to be in Salem too. I was.
I had no idea.
It was interesting.
So we're going to wrap things up here. I'll put some tunes on, and then what I'm going to do is